The roar of the B-17 engines tears through the silence above the gray clouds of occupied Europe. Down below, the world burns. Up above, the sky seems infinite, but it's a deadly labyrinth. A tail gunner, trapped in a glass bubble, stares into the void, waiting for the inevitable. He spins the iron ring of his sight, takes a deep breath, and pulls the trigger. The bullets slice through the air and miss. The enemy vanishes over the horizon. It wasn't a lack of courage, it was a lack of vision. The sight, simple and primitive, couldn't keep up with the speed, the wind, or human instinct. And at that altitude, a millimeter's error meant plummeting from the sky like a wisp of smoke. 1943, the year the sky became a cemetery. The U.S. 8th Air Force flew over the heart of Germany, trying to dismantle its war machine. Missions with names now etched in history: Schweinfurt, Regensburg, Bremen. In each one, dozens of B-17 Flying Fortress bombers fell before even reaching the target. In the tail cabins, boys of 19, 20 years old watched the enemy approach without being able to measure precisely what they saw. The sight they used, the simple ring and bead sight, two pieces of metal aligned with the eye, was an instrument from the past, improvised on a battlefield of the future. The laws of physics didn't forgive technological delays. While German fighters emerged at over 600 kilometers per hour, the gunner had to predict where the enemy would be when the bullets arrived. The problem was that he only saw where the enemy was. There was no light, no calculation, just instinct. And instinct against fast machines was a deadly luxury. On missions like October 14, 1943, nicknamed Black Thursday, more than 60 bombers were shot down in a single day. Men who took off together disappeared into the clouds before noon. The dilemma was cruel. War was modernizing faster than the human eye could keep up. Gravity-guided bombs depended on the shooter's precision, and the shooters depended on sights that still belonged to the First World War. Machines evolved, but vision remained blind. Pilots and engineers began to wonder if there was a way to unite man and calculation, if the human eye could see through physics. It was that question that led British and American scientists into a silent race within the war itself. In hidden laboratories, engineers dismantled binoculars, telescopes, and mirrors, trying to discover how light could help aim with greater precision. The solution seemed distant, almost absurd, until someone thought, what if the sight wasn't a fixed object, but a reflection? What would be born from that simple and unlikely idea would change everything. An invention made of glass and light, a system that projected the sight's reticle directly onto the gunner's field of view. He no longer had to align his eye, the iron, and the target. The target and the reticle became one. The eye finally saw the future. At that moment, the war didn't yet know it, but it was about to be transformed, not by a new weapon, but by a new way of seeing. The reflector sight, an invention born from the curiosity of an Irish engineer decades earlier, would be the dividing line between error and precision, between chaos and control. Stay with me until the end and see how a simple piece of glass transformed the war and gave rise to the technology that today guides fighters, drones, and even autonomous cars. Because sometimes the difference between darkness and victory is just a reflection.
The idea wasn't born on the battlefield. It was born long before the bombs and the fear, in a quiet laboratory in Dublin, in the year 1900, when a man looked through a piece of glass and saw the future. Before the war came the mirror, and before the mirror came the doubt. Why trust only the eye, if light can calculate better? In Dublin, in the early 20th century, a man with a quiet and curious mind observed the problem differently. His name was Howard Grubb, engineer, astronomer, and inventor. While the world still looked to the sky in search of stars, he saw there an optical battlefield waiting to be born. Grubb believed the human eye was powerful but flawed. He wanted to create a way to aim without needing to align metal, sight, and horizon, a way to turn light into calculation. That's how, by chance and genius, the first reflector sight was born. Howard Grubb was the son of telescope builders. He understood how light behaves when it passes through glass, when it reflects, when it bends. His idea seemed almost simple. If the eye can't align all points at once, then let the glass do it for him. Instead of aiming through a notch or a ring, he created a semi-reflective glass plate, where a small luminous reticle was projected. That reticle wasn't fixed, it floated in space, always aligned with the target, regardless of head movement. For the first time, the shooter didn't need to adjust his body, eye, and weapon. He just had to look. The glass did the rest. The concept was ingeniously poetic. The sight didn't show where the enemy was, but where he would be. It was a calculation of light and time, a dance between eye and reflection. The invention seemed too small to change the world, but it was the principle of something much larger, the fusion of man and machine through vision. Howard Grubb patented his idea in 1900, but few understood its importance. The world didn't yet have enough speed to need it. It was like inventing radar before the airplane. Decades passed, acceleration progressed. The skies became testing grounds for engineers and physicists, and Grubb's small invention was rediscovered by other curious men, like Frederick W. Lanchester, who studied ways to apply optics to firing and navigation systems. When war returned to haunt Europe in 1939, the old Irishman's idea finally found its purpose. In the United States, the Sperry Gyroscope Company refined the concept, creating the first military reflector sights on a large scale. Light now would be a weapon. In the cockpits of fighters like the Spitfire and the P-47 Thunderbolt, pilots discovered the power of aiming without thinking. The red reticle floated over the glass in front of their eyes, immobile, constant, reliable. It was as if a star had been tamed and placed before the pilot, guiding every shot with millimeter precision. There was no longer any need to align the sight with the barrel. You just looked at the enemy and aligned the reflection. What Grubb had dreamed for telescopes now guided projectiles at hundreds of meters per second. The transition from instinct to optics was more than a technical advance. It was a philosophical leap. War had always depended on the gaze, on recognition, aiming, judgment. But now the human eye ceased to be the weak point and became empowered by physics. Light, no longer just something that revealed the world, it was the very instrument of precision. For the first time, technology didn't replace man, it amplified him. The reflector sight turned fear into calculation and chaos into a straight line. When this technology finally reached the heavy bombers, something changed in the air. The floating reflection in front of the turret's glass allowed the gunner to anticipate every movement, predict the enemy, feel that there was a chance to survive. The glass ceased to be just a window. It became an invisible shield between life and death. Every red reticle, every point of light dancing in the transparency, was a silent promise of control amid the unpredictable. But light, no matter how perfect, wasn't enough. No invention, no matter how brilliant, could eliminate the human fear of pulling the trigger when death came at high speed. It was still the man who decided, who trembled, who took a deep breath before aiming. Technology had given the gunners a new pair of eyes, but it was they who still needed to see what mattered.
War, like life, is never won by machines alone. It's won by those who learn to see differently. But technology alone doesn't win wars. And in the icy heights over Germany, light was about to meet man. Imagine being alone in a glass capsule at the end of an airplane that vibrates like a living animal. At 10,000 meters high, the world outside has no sound, just cold. The temperature drops to -40 degrees. The wind whistles between the metals. You breathe artificial oxygen while watching, through the small tail window, the gray horizon. That was the post of the B-17 tail gunner, the last man between the enemy and the crew. He didn't see faces, didn't see the blue sky, just the distant echo of war, and the reflection of his own solitude in the curved glass before him. The accounts from the 8th Air Force gunners speak of a kind of fear that has no sound but vibrates in the bones. They were the silent guardians of the bombers, looking back while the plane moved forward. A living metaphor for war, the future advancing and the past pursuing. Many of them described the feeling of helplessness when the enemy appeared suddenly, diving down, too fast to react. The old iron sights turned every shot into a gamble. Error didn't just mean missing the target, it meant condemning friends to death. That's why the arrival of reflector sights changed more than precision. It changed the soul of these men. When the Cheyenne turret was installed in the final versions of the B-17, it brought with it a new kind of confidence. The luminous reticle floated before them, a small red cross over the horizon. Now the gunner no longer had to fight his own instinct. He just had to follow the light. Every enemy movement was tracked with natural ease. Every shot felt guided by an almost mystical calm. For the first time, the sight wasn't a tool, it was an extension of the gaze. Veterans were called that when they aimed through that glass, something changed in their perception of time. It was as if the world outside slowed down. Focus narrowed. Fear diminished. That little point of light was my anchor, wrote a gunner from the 91st Bomb Group in his diary. As long as it shone, I still had control. Others said the reflector sight gave the illusion of being inside the light itself, as if the human eye had finally achieved what the mind always wanted: predictability. Amid the smoke, debris, and confusion, there was clarity. But behind that precision was an invisible weight, because seeing better also meant seeing too much. The gunners could now clearly see the enemy fighters, their shapes, their movements, sometimes even the faces of the German pilots. The reflector sight turned chaos into detail, and every detail reminded them that war wasn't made just of machines, but of people trying to survive. Some confessed that when aiming, they hesitated for an instant, that brief second when light and humanity met. Still, this invention gave many a new faith in technique, in precision, and in something even deeper, the human capacity to turn fear into method. With every successful mission, every squadron that returned home with more lives than before, the reflector sight ceased to be just an innovation and became a symbol. A reminder that even in the coldest heights of human hell, light could guide. Those young gunners didn't know it, but they were witnessing the beginning of an era in which man and machine would work together, not in opposition, but in harmony. The reflector sight wasn't just an optical tool, it was the first step toward what we would one day call human-machine integration. And it all began there, with a piece of glass and a point of light dancing over the horizon. If you like real stories where science and courage meet, subscribe to the channel. Because in the next few minutes, you're going to discover how this small invention forced even the enemy to change their way of fighting.
The light changed the shooter's gaze. Now it would change the course of the war. The enemy always came from behind, until the day it didn't anymore. In early 1944, missions over Germany began to show something few could explain. The Luftwaffe fighters, which had previously attacked mercilessly from the rear, started changing strategy. It was as if the predator had suddenly gone blind. Bombers that once returned mutilated, or didn't return at all, now crossed the English Channel with fewer holes in their wings, more men alive, more confidence. The difference wasn't in the bullets or the metal turrets. It was in the reflection of a small cross of light. Reports from the 8th Air Force confirmed what pilots already knew by instinct. The tail gunner's hit rate had tripled in less than 6 months. Every Cheyenne turret equipped with a reflector sight transformed the B-17 into something new, not just a flying fortress, but an eye that saw danger before it was reached. Aerial war was, after all, a duel of perception. Whoever saw first won. And at that moment, the Allies had learned to see better. The Luftwaffe soon realized it. Rear attacks, once the bomber's blind spot, became suicidal. The precision of the rear machine guns with the new reflector sights made a safe approach almost impossible. So German pilots began trying from other angles, head-on dives, curving attacks, top-down shots. They changed the pattern, seeking gaps in the gaze of the light. But the world of war had already changed. The reflection of a luminous point altered decades of aerial tactics. From that moment on, the battlefield was no longer just the air. It was the space between the eye and the target. Light, silent and invisible, had become the gunner's invisible force field. What was once a desperate shot became calculation, rhythm, confidence. A gunner trained with a reflector sight could predict an enemy fighter's trajectory a fraction of a second in advance, and that fraction up there was the difference between living and vanishing in fire. But something deeper was happening. The light that illuminated the reflector sight also illuminated the mind. It symbolized the dominance of reason over chaos, clarity over fear. It was the triumph of human perception guided by science. The reflection in front of the glass ceased to be just a military tool. It became a metaphor for survival itself. See to live. And amid all that, there was irony. The same light that helped destroy also saved. It prevented planes from falling, entire crews from being lost. It represented, paradoxically, the humanity within war, the effort to turn brutality into precision, instinct into calculation. The reflector sight didn't just change how one shot, but how one thought about seeing, reacting, existing. By the end of the war, the numbers spoke louder than any speech. B-17 formations that survived 1944 missions had return rates up to 30% higher than the previous year. The efficiency of tail gunners doubled. And when asked what had changed, many pointed to the small glass in front of their eyes. An invention so modest, so simple, but one that had tipped the scales between man and the impossible. Germany would call that period the era of mirrors, and perhaps without realizing it, they were right. Because the mirror of the reflector sight reflected more than a reticle of light. It reflected the new spirit of a generation that had learned to look at danger and still aim with calm. But war wouldn't last forever. And the mirror born in the chaos of the skies was about to find a new purpose, far from the sound of machine guns, but still true to the same essence, guiding the human gaze through light. The reflection that once saved pilots would now begin to guide the future. And the future was about to land.
Wars end, but ideas don't. When the bombers landed for the last time and the gunners disassembled their reflector sights to take them as keepsakes, they perhaps didn't know they were holding the embryo of the future. The light that guided their shots in the sky didn't go out, it just changed form. Decades later, in the pressurized cabins of modern jets, it would shine again, not as an instrument of destruction, but as an extension of the human mind. In the 1950s, engineers who had served during the war began adapting the same optical principle of the reflector sight for something even more ambitious, the head-up display, or HUD. The idea was simple and genius: project vital flight information directly into the pilot's field of view without him needing to look away. Altitude, speed, direction, aiming, all reflected in the transparency of the windshield. The same logic that had saved gunners now protected fighter pilots. The reflection had become the new language of aviation. And from there, the light came down. It left military cockpits and entered civilian planes, cars, even operating rooms. The same optical principle used by Howard Grubb over a century ago now guides scalpels, drones, and autonomous vehicles. The red reticle of World War II evolved into digital lines, holographic maps, augmented realities. But the soul is the same: see without diverting, understand without losing focus. The mirror remains there between the eye and the world, translating the invisible.
Today, when a surgeon looks at a transparent screen while operating, or when a driver sees speed projections on the car's windshield, he is using the direct heritage of those reflector sights. An invention born in fear now serves the precision of life. The reflection that once determined who would live amid the fire now helps save lives in silence. And there's something deeply human in that. War, with all its brutality, produced a technology that teaches us to see better, not just the target, but the path itself. Seeing became a way to survive, and understanding a way to evolve. The human eye, once vulnerable, merged with the light it itself created. It's the perfect circle between mind and matter, between looking and creating. When one thinks of the legacy of World War II, memories come of ruins, heroes, and tragedies. But amid the ashes, something invisible was also born: the desire to understand. The reflector sight wasn't just a technical advance, it was a living metaphor for the human impulse to illuminate the unknown. The same impulse that moved Howard Grubb in his small Dublin laboratory, and that continues to move every engineer who tries to make the impossible visible. In the end, it wasn't just about aiming better. It was about seeing differently. The reflection that once floated before a solitary gunner now lives in every screen, every lens, every gaze that seeks precision and clarity. Light conquered chaos, and the mirror conquered darkness. If this story made you see war and technology with different eyes, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Here, we reveal how human ingenuity turned fear into vision. Because history isn't made just by those who shoot, but by those who learn to see.